The
What
wind
is this?
howled
This is
like
a
something
violation.
alive,
Shut it down now.
slamming snow
Ma'am, please
against
calm down.
my
We can
windows
explain.
hard enough to
Explain, there's
rattle
nothing
the
to explain.
glass.
You're done.
Outside, the world was disappearing under white drifts, the kind that swallow sidewalks, cars, and common sense. I stood at my front door watching the heated path I'd installed glow faintly beneath the ice, doing exactly what it was designed to do, keeping a safe, clear walkway through a brutal blizzard. That's when my phone buzzed. One notification. 4 words. Violation notice. Remove immediately. It was from the HOA. I laughed at first, because it felt unreal. The city had already declared a winter emergency. Roads were icing over. Neighbors were trapped inside their homes. And yet, somehow, my heated path, the only clear stretch of pavement on the block, was suddenly a community concern. According to the message, it violated aesthetic guidelines. No exceptions, no delays. Turn it off, now. I stepped outside, the cold slicing through my jacket, and looked down the street. Snow buried everything except my walkway. Elderly neighbors had used it earlier to reach their cars. A delivery driver had thanked me for not letting him slip. It wasn't decorative, it was survival. Still, the WA didn't care. Rules were rules. Another message came in, sharper this time. Failure to comply will result in fines. I stared at the screen, feeling something shift inside me. This wasn't about safety. It was about control. The same board members who vanished during emergencies were suddenly very active when it came to enforcing appearances. Within an hour, the blizzard worsened. Power lines sagged. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Then I heard it. Sirens in the distance, strained and slow. A school bus had attempted the main road and gotten stuck 2 blocks away. Children were inside, parents were panicking, and the only clear path leading toward them was mine. I waited. Surely now they'd reconsider. Surely someone would connect the dots. Instead, an HOA board member showed up in a heavy coat, clipboard in hand, shouting over the wind that I needed to shut the system down immediately. Liability issues, she said. Uniformity mattered, she said. That's when I realized something important. If they wanted obedience, they were about to get something very different. I turned back toward my house, made a decision that would change the entire neighborhood, and let the storm do the rest. The snow had grown heavier by the time I stepped back inside. Flakes whipped against the windows like tiny daggers, and the street had turned into a blinding white river. My heated path hummed softly beneath the snow, its warmth forming a narrow ribbon of safety through chaos. I stared at it, realizing that for the first time, it wasn't just my walkway, it was a lifeline. My phone buzzed again. Another WA message. Immediate compliance required. You were putting the neighborhood at risk. I scoffed. At risk. The bus, frozen 2 blocks down, the children trapped inside, and the neighborhood buried under nearly a foot of drifting snow, that was risk. What they were talking about was entirely about appearances. My heated path had become a symbol of defiance, and somehow, the storm had made that obvious. Outside, the blizzard intensified. I grabbed my coat and gloves, my boots crunching over the thin layer of snow that had already started to accumulate on my path despite the heating. I had no intention of turning it off. Not now, not when it mattered most. The risk I was willing to take wasn't about fines or WA warnings, it was about lives. The bus was still stuck, its hazard lights blinking dimly through the thick snowfall. I could barely make out the shapes of frightened children in the windows, huddled together, trying to stay calm. I felt a surge of resolve and anger. How could anyone prioritize a rule over human life? At that moment, the message of the HOA seemed almost absurd, a cruel joke played in a storm that left no room for petty bureaucracy. I grabbed a shovel and stepped onto the heated path, letting its warmth seep into my boots. The wind tried to push me back, snow stinging my face, but I pressed forward. Each step was deliberate, a silent act of rebellion. By the time I reached the bus, the driver was struggling to keep his balance on the ice. I waved him toward my path, shouting over the wind, "Follow me. There's a safe way." Behind me, I could see the WA board member standing at the edge of the driveway, shaking her head, a mixture of fury and disbelief on her face. She had no authority here, not over safety, not over the storm, not over the moment. I led the bus carefully down my heated path, snowflakes melting instantly underfoot, a surreal line of warmth cutting through the frozen white nightmare. The children's cheers were muffled by the wind, but I heard them. Relief and gratitude glimmered in the driver's eyes. The HOA, meanwhile, could only watch in silence. That rule they had insisted upon suddenly felt meaningless, powerless against the force of common sense and a little defiance. As the last of the school bus safely made it down my heated path, I finally paused, catching my breath. The wind howled with renewed intensity, flinging icy shards of snow into my face, but inside, I felt a spark of triumph. For a brief moment, the chaos of the blizzard seemed manageable, as if my small act of defiance had carved out a pocket of control in an otherwise uncontrollable storm. Yet, I knew this was only the beginning. By the time I returned to my house, the messages had multiplied. The HOA's emails and texts filled my phone, each one more insistent, more threatening. Fines, legal action, community meetings. I scanned them, feeling the familiar irritation rise. Rules, 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 they had no grasp of reality. The storm didn't care about guidelines, and neither did I. I had saved lives. That should have mattered more than any regulation. Still, reality was unyielding. The board member from earlier had returned, this time with reinforcements. 2 more HOA members bundled in coats, clipboards in hand, their expressions a mixture of indignation and awe. They stood at the edge of the heated path, snow crunching under their boots, attempting to assert control over a situation that had already spiraled beyond their authority. "You cannot continue this," one of them shouted, her voice almost lost in the gusts. "You're violating every regulation. The fines will double if you ignore us." I turned toward her, snow dripping from my hair, the wind tugging at my coat. Regulations don't save children stuck in a bus. Rules don't prevent accidents. This path does. My voice carried over the blizzard, firm and unwavering. For the first time, I could see doubt flicker across their faces. The board members had always relied on fear and obedience, but fear had no power here. Obedience was irrelevant when survival was on the line. As the storm raged on, I noticed movement in the distance. Neighbors, wrapped in blankets and heavy coats, had begun to leave their homes, following the trail I had cleared. Word of the safe path spread faster than I could have imagined. People were risking exposure to freezing temperatures just to use the walkway, their gratitude and relief unmistakable. I realized then that what I had started, simply insisting on safety over compliance, was beginning to ripple outward, reshaping the neighborhood's perception of authority. By late afternoon, the blizzard's fury had reached its peak. Visibility was minimal, the air thick with swirling snow, yet I stood firm, the heated path glowing under the storm's onslaught. The HOA could argue, fine, threaten, even attempt legal action, but they could not erase the simple truth. When rules clashed with reality, reality had won. And for those who relied on the path, that victory was tangible, undeniable, and life-saving. By mid-afternoon, the blizzard had transformed the neighborhood into a frozen wasteland. Snowdrifts reached the height of small cars, and every driveway looked like a miniature glacier. From my vantage point at the front door, I could see the heated path glowing faintly, a narrow ribbon of warmth slicing through the frozen chaos. It wasn't just a path anymore, it had become a lifeline, a statement, and a challenge all at once. The HOA, predictably, was not pleased. Their board members had regrouped, pacing along the edge of the property line like generals preparing for a battle they couldn't quite understand. Clipboards in hand, they jabbed at papers, pointed fingers, and shouted over the wind, insisting that I comply immediately or face escalating fines and legal action. But with every gust of wind that blew the snow off my walkway, it became painfully obvious: authority had limits, and nature had none. Neighbors, emboldened by the safe passage of the school bus earlier, began emerging from their homes, carrying blankets, shovels, and even small children tucked under heavy coats. One by one, they approached me cautiously, unsure if stepping onto the heated path would trigger further HOA outrage. "Is this safe?" asked an elderly neighbor, her voice trembling in the cold. I smiled through the snowflakes clinging to my eyelashes. "It's the safest place for now," I said, nodding toward the glowing walkway. "Follow me if you need to get somewhere." The board members scowled, their indignation growing by the second. Their authority, carefully maintained through paperwork and passive intimidation, was eroding in real time. It wasn't the fines or the bylaws that were failing them, it was the simple truth that they could not stop people from seeking safety. I realized, watching the flow of neighbors carefully navigating the snow and ice, that compliance was meaningless when the stakes were life and limb. And yet, the conflict was far from over. The HOA president himself appeared, his expression a mix of fury and disbelief, muttering about precedent and community standards, as if words alone could hold back a blizzard. I met his gaze steadily, feeling the storm's chill bite through my coat. Precedent won't save anyone today, I said firmly. But this path will. As the snow piled higher, the neighborhood's energy shifted. What had begun as quiet defiance, a single heated path in a blizzard, had grown into a collective acknowledgement of necessity over authority. The heated path had become a symbol, survival, common sense, and courage wrapped into a single glowing line through the storm. And for the first time, I felt something I hadn't expected, the power of ordinary people standing together, quietly but resolutely, against rules that made no sense in a crisis. The storm was far from over, but something had changed. The HOA's authority, rigid and unyielding, was faltering against the simplest force of all, practicality. And as I watched the first group of neighbors reach their homes safely, I knew the next challenge would test both their patience and mine. Night began to fall, and the blizzard showed no signs of slowing. The wind had picked up into something almost alive, slicing through the neighborhood with icy precision. Streetlights struggled to pierce the storm, casting weak yellow halos that barely reached the snowdrifts. The heated path, a soft glowing ribbon beneath the chaos, had become the only visible and safe route through the frozen landscape. It felt like a lifeline, but also like a stage on which a larger drama was about to unfold. Inside my house, the phone vibrated incessantly. More messages from the HOA, increasingly aggressive and legalistic. Final warning, immediate compliance required, failure to comply will result in legal action. Each alert felt like a futile attempt to assert power against the unrelenting storm and the undeniable reality of safety. I ignored them. Words, no matter how official, could not undo what was already done. The path had saved lives today, and it would save more tomorrow. By now, the neighborhood had begun to take notice. A few brave souls ventured out to check on elderly neighbors or to help shovel snow from driveways. Each time someone stepped onto the heated walkway, I saw relief wash over their faces, the same relief that had filled the school bus driver's eyes earlier. And yet, the HOA had not given up. They circled the edge of my property, clipboards in hand, trying to intimidate, to assert control over something beyond their grasp. Their presence was a constant reminder that rules and authority were still attempting to compete with the real needs of people. The storm was growing more vicious, and so was the pressure. One of the board members, emboldened by their numbers, approached the walkway directly, pointing at it and shouting over the wind. "This must be shut down. You are defying the community." I stepped forward to meet him halfway, boots crunching against the partially melted snow. "Defying the community? No, I am protecting it, and until the children are safe, and neighbors can move freely, this path stays on." A tense silence fell. The wind screamed around us, drowning out most other sounds. Neighbors watched from windows and doorways, waiting to see who would yield first. Authority and rules against practicality and life-saving logic. For once, the numbers didn't matter, the truth was clear and undeniable. This was no longer a simple HOA dispute, it had become a test of priorities, a confrontation between rigid bureaucracy and human necessity. And then came the sound I had been dreading. The distant rumble of vehicles struggling in the snow, another bus, more cars trapped, more lives depending on what I had built. The stakes were no longer hypothetical. Every moment counted, and the choice was simple, compliance or action. The night was merciless. The blizzard had transformed into a near whiteout, snow whipping horizontally, driven by a wind so fierce it threatened to knock anyone off their feet. Visibility was reduced to mere yards, and every driveway, every sidewalk, every street was buried under ice and drifts. Yet the heated path glowed defiantly beneath it all, a narrow, steady ribbon of warmth cutting through the chaos. It wasn't just a path anymore, it was a statement, a shield, a beacon for anyone daring to step into the storm. I stood at the edge of the walkway, gloves soaked through, jacket coated in snow, and watched as the neighborhood teetered on the brink. The children in the first bus had been safely delivered home hours ago, but now a second emergency was unfolding. Another vehicle, a small car with a family trapped inside, had slid off the main road and was immobilized a block away. Their car lights flickered weakly through the storm, a small signal of desperation. I grabbed my shovel and flashlight, signaling for them to follow the path I had cleared. The heat beneath the walkway melted the worst ice patches, allowing a safe, if narrow, route through the chaos. Behind me, the HOA's presence had escalated to full confrontation. The board members, huddled against the wind with clipboards and megaphones, attempted to assert their authority over a situation they clearly did not understand. This path must be deactivated. You are violating every regulation. One shouted, his voice nearly lost to the storm. I turned to face them, snowflakes plastering my hair and frosting my eyelashes, and answered firmly, rules don't save lives. Safety does. And right now, that is this path. The tension was palpable. Neighbors who had once been timid spectators now stood at their doors, watching and murmuring encouragement. Some ventured onto the walkway themselves, testing its warmth, marveling at the survival it provided in a night that seemed designed to crush human will. Authority was powerless when faced with necessity. Rules held no weight when snow, ice, and danger ruled the streets. As I led the family safely along the glowing path to their home, I could see frustration and disbelief etched into the faces of the HOA members. They had planned to intimidate, to control, to make an example, but they had been rendered irrelevant by a simple truth: preparedness and courage mattered far more than any regulation. Each step along the heated walkway was a small victory, a tangible proof that common sense and humanity could defy bureaucracy, even in the harshest storm. By the time we reached the safety of the family's front door, the snow was blinding, the wind deafening, yet a strange calm had settled over the immediate area. The path had done its job, again. But I knew this confrontation was far from over. The HOA would not let this pass quietly. The storm had revealed the weakness in their authority, and now, they would push back harder than ever. The blizzard had reached a fury I hadn't thought possible. Snow blew in blinding sheets, coating every surface in white, freezing any exposed skin in seconds. Streetlights flickered and threatened to fail entirely, their dim halos barely penetrating the storm. And yet, my heated path cut through it all like a lifeline, glowing softly, offering the only safe route in the neighborhood. For the past several hours, it had become more than a walkway. It was a symbol of common sense defying bureaucracy, and now, it would face its ultimate test. The HOA had escalated dramatically. By now, 3 more board members had arrived, standing near the edge of the property in heavy coats, clipboards and megaphones at the ready. They shouted over the wind, attempting to assert authority, issuing threats of fines, community sanctions, and legal action. Each word, however, carried no weight against the storm or the reality of the neighborhood's needs. Their faces were pale, lips tight with frustration, as the snow continued to fall unabated. They were trying to fight a force far greater than their rulebooks. It was then that a neighbor came running, a young father carrying his small child bundled in blankets. Their car had slid off the road, trapped in a drift 2 streets over. I gestured for him to follow the glowing path, the heat melting the snow beneath our boots as we advanced. The father's eyes reflected gratitude and desperation, the child clinging tightly to his jacket. Behind us, the HOA members waved their arms in protest, but their commands were lost to the howling wind. The path was no longer mine, it belonged to everyone seeking safety. Each step along the walkway reinforced a truth the board couldn't face: rules were meaningless in the face of necessity. Authority without logic or humanity was powerless. As I led the family safely to their driveway, I saw more neighbors emerging, braving the storm to follow the path. The HOA members tried to interject, shouting about violations and precedents, but the sound barely reached the group. The storm itself seemed to mock them, howling and whipping in protest of their rigid control. And then it happened. The board president, the man who had arrived earlier with the most confidence, slipped on an icy patch at the edge of my path. He grabbed at a snowbank, shouting, and fell hard, a sharp cry piercing the wind. I rushed over, helping him to his feet, offering him a hand. His face was a mix of anger, embarrassment, and disbelief. He had spent hours trying to enforce rules, only to realize that rules couldn't save anyone, not in a blizzard, not in this moment. The path had spoken the truth for him: survival comes before obedience. That night, as the storm raged on, the heated path remained the one constant in a world turned white and chaotic. The HOA could threaten, intimidate, and lecture, but the reality was undeniable. The path had saved lives, and nothing they could do would erase that. By the early hours of the morning, the blizzard had begun to ease, leaving behind a neighborhood coated in thick, pristine snow. The wind had calmed, though the streets remained treacherous and silent, as if the storm itself had held its breath, waiting for the aftermath to settle. The heated path continued to glow faintly through the whiteness, a steady ribbon of warmth cutting across the frozen landscape. Its purpose had been fulfilled, not just as a walkway, but as a symbol of courage, common sense, and defiance in the face of rigid authority. I stepped outside again, boots crunching over the softened snow, surveying the scene. Neighbors emerged cautiously from their homes, checking on each other, sharing blankets and warm drinks, their eyes filled with gratitude and relief. Children, who had been trapped or delayed earlier in the school bus, now ran gleefully through the cleared walkways, laughing despite the chill. I realized that the path had done more than save time or prevent slips. It had preserved a sense of community, a fragile human connection that no rule or bylaw could dictate. The HOA board members, once confident in their authority, were now a quiet, begrudging presence at the edge of my property. Their clipboards were lowered, voices hushed, their rigid posture softened by the undeniable reality they had faced. Rules, they had learned, could not outweigh the simple truth of life and safety. I watched the president glance at the glowing path, his expression unreadable, but I knew what he was thinking, that for once, his control had limits. The neighborhood's survival had proven stronger than paperwork and regulations. As I returned to the front door, snowflakes still drifting lazily through the air, a wave of relief washed over me. The storm had tested everyone, neighbors, authorities, and myself, but the outcome was clear. Practicality, courage, and humanity had prevailed over bureaucracy and rigid obedience. The heated path, once a point of contention and ridicule, was now a beacon of reason and safety. It had reminded us all that rules are meaningless if they ignore the people they are meant to serve. By mid-morning, the streets were slowly returning to life. Cars cautiously crept along, footprints marked the walkways, and neighbors helped one another clear the remaining snow. The heated path remained untouched, still glowing softly, a quiet reminder of the night's events. For the first time, the HOA had no arguments, no leverage, no power that could undo the lives saved or the gratitude earned. I stepped back and looked at the neighborhood, now peaceful under the thick white blanket. The storm had passed, but the lessons remained clear. Survival and compassion triumph over bureaucracy, and sometimes, one person's decision can protect an entire community. The path had not only cleared snow, it had cleared the way for understanding, respect, and human decency.
Welcome to Karen Universe, where we dive into every wild, quirky, and intriguing story out there. HOA banned my heated walkway right in the middle of a brutal blizzard while everyone was sleeping on ice. They ordered me to shut down the only safe path. They had no idea that one decision was about to expose something much bigger. If you enjoyed the, don't forget to subscribe to Karen Universe, share with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments.